Hello and welcome to Ensigns to the Nations. We will be talking about this week's Come Follow Me lesson, which is Exodus 7 to 13. And I wanted to start off by asking you a challenge question, or a few of them actually. All right. If there was a battle, first of all, if you knew these characters but you didn't know the outcome of these movies, these are classic movies. But if you just knew the characters, you didn't know the outcomes, who would you guess would win in a battle between Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker? Yeah. You've got this very powerful guy and this pretty ordinary young kid, right? Okay, what about Voldemort versus Harry Potter? Again, everybody's terrified of he who must not be named, right? Who's afraid of Harry Potter? Nobody. He's an ordinary young kid. What about Rocky versus Apollo Creed? You have the heavyweight champion of the world versus a no-name, right? Okay, so, but we all know, we all love these stories because why? The underdog
wins.
Prevails with some kind of personality trait or power from somewhere else that strengthens him and makes him overcome this domineering person that is seemingly unbeatable. All right, we're going to talk about an epic story today. It's an epic story of a battle where an underdog or someone you would not think could possibly prevail actually does prevail. Who are we talking about today?
We're talking about Moses and Pharaoh.
Moses and Pharaoh.
Right.
It's a great story. In fact, it's so great. It is mentioned, aside from Exodus in the Old Testament, it's mentioned 245 times in the standard works. No, in the Old Testament, there's 120 references to it. And in the New Testament, 60. In the Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, Pearl of Great Price, another 65.
Wow.
So this is a really cool story that teaches us so many lessons about, we can think in terms of the plan of salvation.
Yep.
We can think of a type of Christ with the lamb.
Oh yeah, big time.
And just so many great things to learn from this week.
Even LDS history and the pilgrimage to
the
Utah.
Pioneers crossing to their promised land.
Yeah. Well, let's get into it then. So chapter 7 has Moses and his companion Aaron going in and talking to Pharaoh. And the thing that he says is, "Let my people go." Now, Pharaoh has a hard heart, it says many times, and doesn't let him go. So Moses then remembers the things that he learned while he was talking to God at Mount Sinai, and he has Aaron take that staff, that stick, and throw it on the ground. It turns into a snake. So he thought, well, this has got to be it. God, he now knows, Pharaoh knows that I've got God's backing. But then Pharaoh has his magicians do exactly the same trick. And there's snakes crawling around.
This is a story of these plagues. It kind of starts with a sort of small plague, right?
Yeah, I mean,
they
sort
of get worse and worse with time, but there's this pattern where Moses asks, "Let my people go."
Right.
Pharaoh says, "Not going to do that."
Right.
And then Moses says, "Well, I'm going to do this then, if you don't."
Yep.
And then that happens, and then Pharaoh comes back and says, "Okay, get rid of that," and I will.
Yep.
But he doesn't. There's this pattern on and on with how many different plagues?
There's 10 different plagues.
10 different plagues. And I think I'd really like to put those plagues down in the comments or in a section underneath so you can see the 10 different plagues. It's really interesting because each plague has a reference to one of the Egyptian gods of that time.
That's true.
So let's put that in a document underneath. I think that would be, if I was teaching or studying with my family, it's kind of a interesting thing to look at.
Yeah. So the cool thing about this serpent thing is, yes, the magicians, they conjured up some way to do this as well. But then Aaron's snake eats all the rest of them. So I'm sure Pharaoh was like, "Oh, look at me, I can do all this stuff that you can do too."
These magicians did it, except not as good.
No, not nearly as good. So then the next day they start with this first plague, which is turning the Nile into blood. Might not necessarily be blood, but maybe just diseased or dirty or poisonous water. But that affects quite a bit of people because everybody needs water in Egypt. Interesting that it mentioned, we talked about how Pharaoh is hard-hearted, right?
Yes. It says in the scriptures, Heavenly Father hardened his heart.
Yes.
Is what it says in Exodus.
Right. Well, so it's mentioned like 15 times in these scriptures. The first few of them does say that Pharaoh hardened his heart. But then it got into the Lord hardened his heart. And you think, well, why would the Lord do that?
Okay, so it says the Lord hardened his heart, but did you look at the Joseph Smith translation?
Oh, no. What is that?
The Joseph Smith translation says, Pharaoh will harden his heart. So I think that it's a distinction that even in those earlier chapters, Joseph Smith wanted to clarify because he had free agency.
Yes, absolutely. Of course he did. And, there's always going to be a pattern, like you said, of if he's hardening his heart now, he's going to continue to harden his heart. And it's just a foregone conclusion. And the Lord knew that already anyway. So then we get into chapter 8. Moses tells Pharaoh, let my people go. Or I'm going to make a bunch of frogs come up.
Frogs are number 2,
yep,
right?
Yep. And
number 2.
All these frogs, they come up and cause all this havoc. The magicians, though, did the same trick. They also had these frogs controlled. So again, he's still trying to say, well, I don't know what's happening. Let my people go. That's an awesome little thing. Always reminds me of, what movie was that on?
Let my people, isn't that Ferris Bueller?
Yeah, I think it was. But he says, let my people go 9 different times as an invitation for Pharaoh to let them go. And this really starts out, he says he wants to let his people go because they want to serve the Lord. That's the reason why you got to let my people go. It's not even necessarily to get out of the bondage that they're in, but it's to let them serve the Lord. Which is interesting. Now, Pharaoh then repeatedly rejects that invitation. And I think, how many times do we get invited to do something and we reject it, and we reject it, and we reject it? Maybe not because we're hard-hearted, maybe just because we're not prepared to do it. And how many times do we wait until the very last plague or trial that we have before we finally give in to God?
So we talked about some of the lessons you can pull from this story,
right?
And I think that's just another one of them. It teaches us about the nature of human beings and how the nature of God to give us another chance. I think he wanted Pharaoh to do the right thing as much as he wanted Moses to do the right thing.
Right.
So he gives him opportunity after opportunity to not harden his heart, but to let the people go, make a good choice. He also wanted the people of Egypt. He loved them too.
Sure.
So these shows us the nature of God and giving us these opportunity after opportunity to let the Israelites go.
To do the right thing.
And to do the right thing.
In a bunch of different scriptures in these chapters, it talks about really the reason why. Like chapter 8, verse 10 says, that thou mayest know that there is none like unto the Lord your God. 9:14 says, that thou mayest know that there is none like me in all the earth. So that's also a big part of this, is
to show the power.
I am God.
Yeah.
And I'm better than your Egyptian gods. I am the only one. So the frogs are out there. The Pharaoh says, please take away the frogs, and if you do, I'll let your people go. So the next day the frogs all die. But again, it says Pharaoh hardened his heart, and he did not let the people go. So the next thing, Moses or Aaron turned the dust into lice. So that's number 3.
They're getting worse.
They're getting worse. Now,
the first ones are kind of an inconvenience.
Yes,
we don't want the water to be yucky.
Exactly.
And we don't really love these frogs being around. But now we're starting to like actually affect their health and
Yeah.
comfort.
But the other thing about this one is that the magicians tried to do this and they couldn't do it.
Right.
So that's an interesting
They're getting
part of
harder
that. They're
to
getting harder.
replicate.
Moses said again, let my people go, or I'm going to send flies. But then he also adds a whole nother thing to this new plague. He said in verse 22 of chapter 10, and I will sever in the day that land of Goshen in which my people dwell, that no swarms of flies shall go there. So Goshen is where the Israelites are.
Oh yeah, and that's the other distinction. These plagues were not happening in Goshen.
Right, yeah.
So there was this place of refuge
he made
for
this
the Israelites.
right. And that's an important part to learn from this, is that God's people, or the people who follow God, are protected by him, and that he does distinguish between them and those who don't follow God. And not that the Egyptians were necessarily bad, but they weren't following God.
Right. They didn't have that protection.
So Pharaoh says, okay, go. I hate these flies. The flies were so thick they couldn't see. And so he says, go. So the Lord removed the flies, but again, Pharaoh did not let the people go. So chapter 9, we get into some more plagues. Let my people go, he says, or I'll kill all the cattle, but not the Israelites' cattle. And then Pharaoh didn't let him go. Then Moses made boils on everyone, even the magicians, which I thought was interesting and fun. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh again, so he didn't let him go. The next day, Moses says, let my people go. He says, or tomorrow, I'm going to send hail and fireballs.
It's not good.
And it's going to destroy everything, he says. Now, I thought this was another add to this plague, because the Lord tells Moses to get the people ready and let them know that this is going to happen. So they brought all their stuff inside so that the hail and the fire won't hurt it, and they were prepared, and they didn't have any problem. After that, the Pharaoh's like, okay, I give. Of course, he didn't really give. He didn't let him go. And I think about Pharaoh and how trustworthy is he? He's not very trustworthy. He lies all the time, and he says stuff just to say it. Very much like many of the politicians we have today. So in chapter 10, they go on. Moses says to Pharaoh, let my people go, or I'm going to bring locusts. And so he tells them, they're going to eat everything. But Pharaoh said, okay, go, but just the men. I don't want anybody else to go. I think you guys are up to something. So Moses says, no, that's not the deal. And so he sends the locusts. Later, Pharaoh says to Moses that he's sorry. He didn't mean to be so terrible about it. And so Moses got rid of the locusts. But again, Pharaoh didn't let him go. Time after time, this is just that pattern that you're talking about. Then Moses brought a thick darkness for 3 whole days. This is a terrible darkness. They couldn't see anything. All they did is sit there in the dark and hear people screaming. Of course, this was except for the children of Israel. They got what they needed. And Pharaoh said, oh, okay, go, you can go. I'm tired of this. But he said, but leave your flocks. Moses said, no, that's not the plan. That's not what we're going to do. So then chapter 11 is really the final warning for this final plague that God knew was going to work this time. The firstborn of every family, except for those who are prepared, which are the Israelites, because he's going to tell them how to prepare. He says they're all going to die. Even the cattle, firstborn of the cattle, were going to die. And again, the Lord prepares his people. One of the things he told them to do is go get your 2 years food storage, which was really to go to their Egyptian neighbors and get silver and gold. And the Egyptians were like, oh, okay. I think they were a little scared of the Hebrews now, because they just gave it to them. So they had all this stuff. Was this like the first 2-year storage? I think it's interesting that we have those same kinds of things now. Does our prophet give us warnings and give us ways to prepare? I think back and about how when we came up with the home-centered family, the church-centered family, where we were supposed to do family scripture study. That helped us when COVID came around. So there's certainly lots of things like that that are going to be that's God trying to help us, telling His prophet, get these people prepared. So Moses and Aaron go and talk to the Pharaoh and tell him about all this, and he didn't care. He wouldn't budge. So, chapter 12. This is the big one about the Passover. And these are really God's instructions for Israel to go and be prepared to not be affected by the plague. First thing he says is, I'm going to change the calendar. I want you to start the new year now with this month right now, and that's going to be something interesting for you. So it's a new start. It's what we do. Then he says every family must kill a perfect lamb. So sacrifice a lamb. It has to be unblemished and perfect. What is that? That's, this is probably one of the biggest and most easily the strongest type of Christ that we have in the scriptures, because of course the lamb is Jesus Christ. He was perfect. On the doorposts, they were supposed to put the blood of the lamb. Of course, the blood of the lamb saves us now, as we put the blood not on our physical doorpost, but on our outside persons, where we don't hide it. It's right there for people to see, and people know what we believe in. They were supposed to then eat the lamb. They were supposed to eat it roasted. They're supposed to have unleavened bread with it, and then also bitter herbs. The bitter herbs, we'll talk about the unleavened bread in a second, but the bitter herbs are supposed to show all the bitterness that they have gone through with the bondage and everything that having them for the last 400 years. And they're supposed to remember that, and I think it's good. I think we do need to know the bitterness so that we can know the sweet. Another thing they had to do was they had to be fully dressed and prepared to go when they're eating this meal, this Passover meal.
This was my favorite part. Can I jump in?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Exodus 12:11. And thus shall ye eat it, with your loins girded and your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and ye shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. So I love that verse. I love the whole idea of keeping your shoes on your feet. Now, in Middle Eastern culture, it's standard practice actually to remove your feet when you enter remove your shoes when you enter a home. So certainly, eating a meal in a home with your shoes on would be very unusual. But there's really significance in this to show that you have faith that something is going to happen and that you're prepared for the journey. I remember Jonah. Do you remember this? He liked to sleep with his clothes for the next day on before school. Our son, when he was younger, because he couldn't understand, why would I wear pajamas? I can just get dressed right now, and then when I wake up in the morning, I'm already ready. I'm ready to go. And that's what these people were doing. They have their shoes on. So do we have our shoes on? Are we that faithful that when we're told something is going to happen, this is after hundreds of years of being in bondage, but get your shoes on. It's happening tonight. And they had that faith, and they did that. That it would happen. They were ready, and they had faith that this promise was about to happen, and the deliverance was coming that night, and it did. It did come that night, in the middle of the night.
So they had this meal. This started the Passover tradition of this feast of the unleavened bread. Leaven is an interesting thing too. It's like yeast, right? It makes the bread rise. It makes the dough rise. The reason why couldn't have leaven in their bread is because they had to hurry up. This was urgent. They couldn't wait for the bread to rise. Leaven is also, because it spreads quickly and quietly through the dough, it's been talked about as like sin, and they wanted to leave this sin behind. Later in the scriptures, it says that they need to get rid of leaven from their house. They don't need it anymore, and so that should teach us that we need to get rid of things in our lives like sin that aren't going to do us any good. So it's unleavened bread is an important part of this whole thing. So at midnight, every Egyptian family is struck by this plague, even the Pharaoh. And then Pharaoh finally gives in. He couldn't handle it anymore. So the Exodus begins. Over 600,000 people leave. This is 430 years of bondage when they finally are able to get out of there. And so God commands Israel to do the Passover and celebrate this every single year, and so they do. Now today we still do this Passover. And in that day, it was looking forward to Christ and what he was going to do to deliver us. In our day, it's looking backwards to Christ, and we do it by the sacrament. And that's where we take the bread and the water, and we think about Jesus Christ and what he's done for us, and we ingest them in, just like they ate that sacrificial lamb. Chapter 13, the end chapter, the best thing I like about that is when he talks about how when they left, they had God leading them. He led them in two ways. One was a cloud in the daytime, which gave them shade. And the other thing was in the nighttime, it was a pillar of fire, and which gave them light. We have wonderful ways that God leads us in prophets and apostles, and in scriptures, and in the temple, and the inspiration that we can receive there, that can be our pillar of light in the nighttime and our cloud in the daytime. Well, so we went a little bit around further, but here's the temple. We've gone around. What do you think? Who would win, Rocky or I was going to say Clubber Lang?
Well, in all of those cases that I brought up, there was some kind of power that strengthened the underdog, right? So
Right.
in Harry Potter, he was a wizard, right? So he
Right.
was able to use that power.
He had that power.
And then in Star Wars, there's the Force. He used the Force and he was able to use that. So these are just sort of fun stories, obviously not real type of power, but
Right.
this is a little bit different because we know that the power of God was with Moses. And so that's where he drew upon his strength. And much of what we talked about today is really
Yeah.
referring back to the power of God. And when we have that on our side, all is possible.
So, Moses, who was kind of like Rocky, just a nobody, he went up against the most powerful person in the land, but yet he had God on his side, and that's the most important thing. That priesthood power is going to be what makes us win. So clearly, Moses won, Pharaoh didn't, and we'll continue on with that story next time. Remember this, though, this week: is my heart soft enough to be able to respond to God? And then think about this, because it's one thing that God really wanted us to do. Am I remembering what Christ has done for us? Whether it's in prayer or scriptures or taking the sacrament every week, remember what Christ has done for us.
Okay, join us next time on Ensigns to the Nations.
Good job, Bubs. Good job.